Start off clarifying the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, since there seemed to be a little confusion on that last class. So the main definition. Okay. The main definition is prokaryotic cells have no membrane-bound organelles. Eukaryotic cells, again, like you and I, eukaryotic cells have membrane-bound organelles. Prokaryotic cells are generally smaller, eukaryotic cells are generally larger. And I wanted to give some examples so we had kind of a more tangible reference. So bacteria and archaea, which I looked up examples of these, and I don't think that would really help us remember them. None of them are really like popular organisms. So bacteria, prokaryotic cells, eukaryotic cells are plants, animals, or fungi. The thing about fungi is some of those can be single-celled. So you can have single-celled eukaryotic cells. We kind of had some ambiguity on whether or not eukaryotic cells could be single-celled. But so this is in the notes now that'll be online. Again, bacteria, prokaryotic cells, plants and animals, so animals like us, eukaryotic cells. Does that make sense? Great. Okay. So what I thought we could do is we could get into groups, maybe of like 2 to 4 or whatnot, whatever's convenient for you guys, and just go through and hopefully without your notes, just match what organelles have what functions. And if these don't really help you remember them, you can just write out what the function is in your own words. I just thought these would be kind of an easy way to contextualize it. But if you'd rather in your group go over what the actual functions are, then you can do that. And we'll get together and we'll match these up as a class and we'll talk a little more about them. So why don't we get started with that? And we'll do that for like 5 minutes or so. Sound good? Great. So go ahead. You can move your desks. You can stand on your desks. You can shout. Anything you want. No, you don't have to write it down. If it helps you, though. It might be good for your notes to write it down. Whatever is best for you. Oh, is that you? Was it today? No. Yeah. So primary dictates secondary. Yeah, more detail on how they would affect maybe if you want to look at the secondary structure, the secondary structure determines which functions. And I do the first. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. I make lots of mistakes. No. I just wasn't even thinking about what was her getting groups, it's fun. Yeah.
Floor plans would be and the only reason why I think about
I would like to hear right, but I don't want to lie to you. No, but why do you think that? Good. Go one down.
What's 6 and 12? Thank you. Yeah, I can see that.
Whatever works.
Would that be live versus right? I thought you were three. So roughly R, once you come out of the nucleus, you go into the roughly R that has the.
Said my transfer is make the rest of my notes in those seconds. So I can
It's a good task.
I'll still go out of the roughly R.
You're not what?
The roughly R, you know, that's the, it looks like a wheel like that, and it has.
No, I don't take them. They don't get me
So that's how I'm thinking that might be the bad.
Yeah. I would focus more on the review questions in the lecture.
And the funny part is, and the funny part is, I get better on quiz number 4 or 5 than I get on.
Yeah. Well, if you're just focused on the lectures, I just take the stuff from lectures and put those numbers.
I do better with quiz, I do better with class.
Those are more
and make sure that I print out every question.
I didn't try.
Yeah, I can't basically right.
So one is.
But it makes them try. And then I'm gonna have to go through it.
That's the floor class. Five is B, four is A, three is E, two is D,
I have Learn smart, I get all that right, I get 100. I have
I have it as D. No, keep your.
Like smaller scale and
The learn smart is straight to the point. I get that.
We'll talk about it.
The Golgi apparatus.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. That whole section, I get everything. Learn smart is straight to
Yeah.
the point. You don't like it. You have a gray area.
So what would you put for?
Other than that, everything else works.
Yeah, I was thinking more of like what they produce, but what do you think?
Oh, that was
Yeah. I would not produce. I'm glad it's generating so much discussion. So all right, so why don't we go over these as a class? I've been informed that my analogies could maybe use a little bit of work, but we can make new ones together. It'll be a good bonding experience. So what would you guys say for one? What's the nucleus? Command center. And so what does that mean in kind of more biological terms? What's the command center going to do?
The DNA. It holds the DNA.
What's the DNA? Yeah. So what's the DNA? DNA is like the instruction manual, like the blueprints. Great, good job. So the nucleus is what's really going to control how the cell is responding to different forces and how the cell behaves. That's the nucleus. Maybe that one's okay. We'll stick with that one. Ribosome. What's the ribosome like? Okay, so workshop makes sense. I understand why you would say that. I was looking more for factory because it kind of produces bigger things. Usually proteins are much bigger than what so what's number 3? Yeah, 3 should have been workshop because that kind of modifies proteins. So what I was thinking, my thought process was the ribosome is making proteins which can be very large. The endoplasmic reticulum can be modifying those proteins or making lipids. That was my intent.
Because the ribosomes are within the ER, that the ribosomes must be physically smaller.
Yeah, that's reasonable. What would a better analogy be, maybe, instead of factory and workshop that we could use for ribosome and ER? Now we're on the same page. Yeah, that's not really, that's true. That's not really an analogy though. It's more of just a fact. But you're more correct than mine was. Any other ideas?
I don't know. Ribosome you say producer for 3. I don't know.
Like modifier.
I would say like a store.
Okay. That's
I
yeah.
don't know. Sometimes
Like the
store
distribution.
modified stuff.
Yeah, that's true. I won't put these on the quiz, so it's just maybe we can just solve it that way. Put them on the quiz. Okay, I just won't put these ones on the quiz. All right. This is bizarre. This is why teaching is so confusing to me. I have no idea what will work and won't work.
Can the workshop be like the assembly line? And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no.
I mean, you explained that usually.
Okay. Well, we'll find a way. I won't ever mark you off for calling the ribosome a workshop because that would not be fair.
Workshop and factory are kind of synonymous
Yeah.
words. So
Yeah. 4. What's the Golgi apparatus?
That's the post office.
The post office. So.
Much smaller than the factory.
Yeah.
post office.
Yes, I have made a mistake. Okay, so the post office. What's a post office do? Processes and sends things around. And so the Golgi apparatus is responsible for that. The Golgi apparatus will package biomolecules that the cell makes and send them around to different parts of the cell or out of the cell, which we'll talk about maybe later today, maybe Tuesday.
Well, is it perfect? I mean, comparing it to the post office, does it ever send stuff to the wrong place?
Oh, yeah, it probably certainly does. So let me think of a good. Yeah, I mean, I just stick with yes, and I'll as we move forward in the class, I'll try to find examples of what happens when things go wrong with the cell. But what I could say is just like a post office. You know, if you went to the post office and it always sent things to the wrong place, and let's say your business relied on the post office, your business would just close, or you'd go out of business. Just like a cell, if the Golgi apparatus in the cell was always messing things up and not doing them properly, the cell would die. So what happens is nature kind of naturally chooses cells with post offices that function, and other ones just die. And so if it has 1,000 cells with 1,000 different post offices and only one works, then the other 999 will die and the one will keep working and reproduce. So yes, it does fail, but nature selects things that don't fail or fail less frequently. So we have command center, workshop factory, and then post office. What's the lysosome? Recycling plant. Yeah. So how does the lysosome work? Does anyone remember? Digests. That's great. Good. Exactly. And how does anyone remember how it digests the biomolecules? That's all right. This is kind of a little extra stuff. So the pH in the lysosome is very low. So is that acidic or basic if the pH is low? Acidic. So with a very low pH, it's going to denature and break down other biomolecules into their smaller parts. So protein will get broken down into amino acids. Big polysaccharides will get broken down into monosaccharides, individual carbohydrates, and things like that. And so this way, if the cell has damaged proteins or ingest proteins somehow, it can break them down into smaller building blocks and use them for more useful things, just like a recycling plant would.
Does nature apply to any biomolecules?
We usually just use it for proteins. Yeah.
If you're trying to say like this breaks down into this, would it be
stuff that would say nature now?
So denatured is usually like unfolds and not breaks into yeah. But
But
I wouldn't if you use those incorrectly, that would be okay. That's kind of fine. Yeah. So lyse, yeah. So I'm sure. So lyse means like to break apart. I'm not sure what like the Latin or the Greek root means, but lysosome is just a part of the cell that's breaking things apart. Mitochondria, powerhouse. Yeah, this one is really common.
Solar.
No. Mitochondria is the powerhouse.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought
No,
last
that's okay.
already.
And so it's also kind of like a water wheel, because what it does is it changes potential energy into a different form of energy that it can use, just like we do with electricity. So it's like if you had a water wheel that would charge a battery, it's sort of like what the mitochondria is doing. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward. So mitochondria is like the powerhouse. So that would mean the chloroplast is like the solar panel. Great, because it takes in the sunlight and changes it into chemical potential energy in the form of glucose.
So you said the mitochondria is like the water wheel or whatever. Is the energy also stored in the mitochondria, or is it just produced there and then slowly also?
So it's it's stored there and then changed in another form called ATP, and that gets sent outside of the mitochondria to do other things.
Are the mitochondria and chloroplasts mutually exclusive? Do plants have mitochondria?
Yeah, great. Yeah, plants do have mitochondria. Yeah, good question.
So, if they use the solar panel to collect their energy from the sun, what does mitochondria do? Do they all extract from the water then?
Okay, so biologically, what would happen is a plant would collect the sunlight from the sun, and it would change it into glucose using its chloroplast, and then that glucose could get stored in the cell or moved around to other cells, and then other cells will use their mitochondria to change that glucose into ATP. So it'd be sort of like the chloroplast takes in energy and puts it in like really big bills, and it sends those really big bills to mitochondria, put into smaller bills, and the smaller bills are easier to spend on like small transactions. It'd be like it was a $100 bill. You don't go buy a stick of gum with a $100 bill. You use like $1 or quarters. I don't know. I don't buy gum. Okay, so this was maybe not the best review, but it at least got us thinking about parts of cells. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about how eukaryotic cells are using energy. So we're talking also about biomolecule, carbohydrates. So what mitochondria do, and again, mitochondria are in plants and animals, but chloroplasts are in plants only. I guess we talked about this question already, but we can talk about it more if we're still confused. So what mitochondria do, which are in both plants and animals, is they take carbohydrates, and if you're an animal, you get those carbohydrates by eating. If you're a plant, you get those carbohydrates by using the sunlight, and then minerals and particles you find in the air and soil. So mitochondria use those carbohydrates and oxygen to make carbon dioxide, water, and energy, which is why when you breathe out, you're going to breathe out carbon dioxide. When you breathe in, you're going to breathe in more oxygen. So if we really think about this, this explains a lot of why we do what we do as organisms. We have to always be taking in food to get enough carbohydrates. We have to always be breathing to get enough oxygen, and then we're going to excrete or produce as waste carbon dioxide and water, and we're going to have energy to use to do useful things. And some of those useful things are just to kind of maintain the status quo of our body, of our cells. It takes the constant input of energy to keep us where we're at, because things tend to fall apart, and so we need energy to maintain everything. We also need energy to move around, to find more food, and ultimately to reproduce, which is kind of the purpose of all biology. So that's what mitochondria are doing. And then chloroplasts have sort of an opposite process. So they're producing carbohydrate and oxygen. There's carbohydrates in the form of glucose. But to do that, they're taking in solar energy and carbon dioxide from the air, and then water. So plants are taking in energy from the sun, carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil, and they're producing carbohydrate and oxygen. So it's a nice little cycle. So we have plants and animals. Yeah, exactly. We have animals that are producing carbon dioxide, plants that consume that carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, and then animals can take in the oxygen. And also animals can eat plants, it's just like a good cycle. And then animals die, they turn into carbohydrates, carbon, and then it's a good cycle. So this is a little bit about how different organisms are using energy, producing energy. So, and this all comes down to the organelles within the cells and the biomolecules that they can use. So this is how things are starting to come together into processes and systems that work together.
Did you want us to answer that question? Why do plants have like?
Yeah, sure. Why? Do you have any guesses? Anyone want to paraphrase or in their own words? What?
I think you've answered it already.
Yeah.
Like it receives the sun and the water and the carbohydrates, and then it stores chloroplast, and then it lets it out in small bits.
Yeah.
Mitochondria are smaller bits.
So the chloroplast will produce carbohydrates, but carbohydrates are good for like energy storage, but they're not good for like spending energy. So I guess it's more like a checking and a savings account. Carbohydrate is kind of more like a savings account. You don't like use it to spend on daily things, but it's a good way to store energy. And that's what chloroplasts will do. They'll take the solar energy and they're going to store it in carbohydrates for like long-term storage. But then when they need it to spend on daily things, they have to use their mitochondria, kind of put it in their checking account and use that to spend.
So the energy is the mitochondria also, just like it is in animals, for the plants?
Yeah, so mitochondria do the same thing in plants and animals. Is that what you're asking? Yeah.
The way that they transport the energy?
Yeah. Right, it's better for cellular level kind of energy expenditures. Great.
Is solar energy just like proton?
No, it's not. So it's photon. So it'd be just light. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all it is though?
Yeah.
Just a bunch of photons?
Exactly. Yeah, that get absorbed by the plant. Yeah. So so all the energy on Earth comes from the sun, and then that energy from the sun is absorbed by plants only. And then we get the energy as animals by eating either plants or animals that have eaten plants. So all the energy that we need to survive ultimately came from the sun, which is like millions of miles away, which is really cool. Bio is awesome. Okay, any questions on that? Oh. Sorry, I always forget what I have on each slide. I try to remember, but it's a little bit much for me. Hopefully this is helpful. So solar energy ultimately can't be transported as efficiently as ATP. So plants have to use both mitochondria and chloroplasts to get this energy in a more transferable form to use on different reactions. Okay, so we're going to talk now. We've talked a lot about energy use and making proteins and whatnot, but we know that cells and plants and animals have very specific shapes. And to have that shape on a cellular level, they have a cytoskeleton. So the cytoskeleton is the part of the cell that gives it its structural integrity. And not only does it give it its structural integrity, it also interacts with its environment. So it can respond to forces that are placed on it, and it can use it to communicate with neighboring cells. So cells don't just, all the cells in our body don't just go off and do their own thing and do whatever they want. They all have to communicate with each other and make sure they're all acting in a concerted motion to be the most efficient. So we're going to talk about a few kinds of a few different parts of the cytoskeleton. First is actin filaments. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit because I think it's interesting when we think about how muscles work. So if you want to move around, you have to use your muscles, and in your muscles are actin filaments and myosin. So we're going to talk a little bit about what ATP is, and we're going to talk about the cytoskeleton a little bit. So inside your muscle, you have these fibers, and these individual fibers can be broken down into individual actin filaments that are all perfectly aligned to perform very specific motions. And so when you have these actin filaments, along them you have these myosin. These are just other molecules that when you add ATP, they move, they jump forward on the actin. And they all move in a concerted motion, and it helps you move individual fibers along each other like this. So here we have part of the muscle called a sarcomere, and we have actin and myosin, and as they contract, as you add ATP, they can go like this to this, and so it makes the muscle contract. So as you add in ATP that you got from the, what organelle is producing ATP? Mitochondria. So the ATP from the mitochondria can go to the muscles and make them contract. So this is something you could spend your energy on. So this is why you would have to be ingesting energy. One of the reasons you would ingest energy, so you can make ATP to be able to contract your muscles, and that way you can walk around and do interesting things. So actin filaments are a part of a cytoskeleton that can give structural support, and they can be involved with cellular motion. So I think this picture is really cool. So what you have here is, we've been talking a little bit about how the Golgi apparatus can move things around in the cell, and it does that by traveling along these microtubules. So this is a cell. Let me turn the lights off. Some of them. So this is a cell right here, and what they did is they added molecules that when you shine a specific type of light on them, they're going to appear either green, blue, or red. And these molecules are going to either attach to the nucleus, which is blue, to microtubules, which are green, or actin, which is red. So you have the actin kind of around the outside, projecting from the inside too, but it gives it the cell its very specific shape. And as if another cell, like right here where they're touching each other, that force between the cells can get picked up basically by the nucleus because the actin filaments can feel it. You have the microtubules running along the inside of the cell, and this is what the Golgi apparatus is going to use to send things along to different parts of the cell. And in the center here, you have the nucleus. So this is sort of, one perspective of what cells look like. And all of this is very well organized, very efficiently organized in a very specific manner to give the cell its best chance at surviving and doing its job. Because cells have very specific jobs. We have different types of cells, and they all do different things. And they do different things by having a different structure. No, just stretching.
It's a silly question.
Nah, there's no silly. Well, there's probably no silly.
There's those are all different cells.
Well, so that's a good question. Each cell has one nucleus. So each time you see a nucleus, that's going to be one cell. So these are 6 cells. Like this is one cell, this is the outside of it, this is another cell, this is a 3rd cell, 4th cell, 5th cell, 6th cell.
Those little tiny green lines that are hollow.
Yeah, so inside of them, yeah, it would be hollow. Yeah. What? How do they know that?
Magnification.
That's a good question. I'm not sure how they know that. So they do know that if you can take out these microtubules, they'll be made of individual parts called tubulin, because you can break them down into smaller components. And you could probably look at those individual components with a really precise microscope that doesn't use light. It would use electrons, which are a lot smaller. This is probably not helping a lot. I'm not sure how they know that. I could guess, but I don't really know how they know that.
And do all organelles travel?
No, good question. Not all organelles travel on the microtubules, yeah. But only vesicles are going to travel on the microtubules. So the Golgi apparatus is going to send little packages along these microtubules to different parts of the cell, or maybe to outside of the cell. So some of your cells produce hormones that have to go far from your body. So all your hormones are made, or to my knowledge, all your hormones are made in your pituitary gland, which is in your brain or near your brain. But those hormones have to go all over your body, all throughout your muscles and different organs. And those will get made in the cell. They'll get sent outside of the cell in little packages from the Golgi apparatus along the microtubules and they'll leave the cell, go into the bloodstream, and then travel throughout your body. So some of your cells are producing things that they have to send outside of the cell, and they can use this system to make that happen. Isn't that exciting? Okay, so that was the end of chapter 4. These are just some review terms that you can use to study. So what I would do if I was studying for this class is before the quiz, I would make sure I knew what all these terms meant. And if I didn't know what they meant, I would look through the lecture notes. And if I still didn't know what they meant, I would email myself, which would not really work that well. The next Thursday, the 1st. All right, this would be a good place to take a break unless there's any questions. Yeah. All right, let's take a 5-minute